This is the period of the colonial establishment of European colonial rule. You find the period of the Genesis, the beginning. In other words, Genesis is just the beginning. It's the late 1870s to around, circa that is, it's either CA or it's just C. Okay? Circa, it means around about 900, 1900. Okay? This period up to there and so on is that period of legitimate commerce, legitimate trade, not slavery, promoting commerce, having companies come to extract oil and cocoa and whatever was possible, diamonds. This is all around this period. Okay? Then you have the period of the imposition. So then it's pretty, in that period, it's pretty disorganized. There's a lot of contestation between various companies and the state. In some cases, there's no state structure. It's just the companies competing with each other, such as in the Belgian Congo, in Mozambique, these chartered companies doing everything. Then it's the period of the imposition of colonial rule. This is now South Africa in many ways, especially the Cape, the Western Cape is very different to this because it's much earlier. 1652 already. The imposition is already there, starting in the 1650s, 70s, 80s. Then you have the imposition, the late 1880s until World War I. Now World War I. This year is the anniversary, the 100th anniversary. Okay, of the World War I. This was the period of the imposition of colonial rule. Then it's the period of the construction. So now they're constructing the apparatuses from World War I to the 1920s. This is a crucial period, the 1920s. And then we have the institutionalization, and we'll soon get to the and then you have, we won't deal with decolonization or liberation, quote unquote. Decolonization from the 1950s onwards. Now I think it's important, it's good to have this framework, because at every phase there was resistance. At every phase. And in the first phase, with the beginnings of colonial rule and through to the imposition, the resistance was often simply a reaction to what was happening. And it was local, it was often quote unquote tribal, it was often led by chiefs, and it was to conserve the status quo. In a sense, it was conservative. It wasn't radical to change anything, but it was a defense against colonialism. Okay? Is that clear? So if you look at the early histories of the interactions between Africans and the Europeans, it was often to say, go away, we want to maintain our way of life. We don't want to pay your taxes, and so on and so forth. We don't want to be subjected to your rule. So it was simply to conserve the status quo. Yeah, go ask me.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but did people know they were being colonized, or didn't they see other opportunities in terms of development and stuff? or they only saw the disadvantages of colonization?
Yeah.
Because the way they were doing it, they structured it in a way that it can benefit them also in terms of them going and work and all that stuff.
Well, firstly, there were those who were tempted to benefit from it. I told you that in West Africa, for instance, there are many examples of alliances as the French are moving up the Senegal. Pre-existing internal conflicts lead to some groupings making an alliance with the French for guns to beat their local enemies. African societies were internally divided also. Africa wasn't a continent where everybody was happy and just resting in the sun and lazing about. People were also struggling here with each other. There were societies in contestation and conflict. This is what happens in history. And so if you have access to better weapons, you can try to make a deal to beat your enemy. This is what happened. We have many examples of this. Now, do we call those people who use the Europeans collaborators? Maybe it's our standard that we're saying they collaborate. They had an objective to beat their enemy. The other grouping that they beat with European weapons may have also asked for European weapons if they had access to that. So that is what happened in the early phase. There are lots of these stories of certain sections of a particular geographical space making a temporary and a strategic alliance with the European company or the European military force. The European military force knew fully well that this is they're going to turn against these groups that they're making an alliance with. So in South Africa, this kind of armed rural rebellion goes right into the 20th century. 1906, we have a rebellion in what is today KwaZulu-Natal called the Bambata Rebellion. And the Bambata Rebellion is an armed uprising. It's about the last uprising of this kind for land against colonial intrusion. But it was almost useless because the colonial state was already in that highly institutionalized. In many other cases, they could beat it was not a foregone conclusion that the Europeans were going to win. I told you the case that is so celebrated in African history is the war between the Italians and the Abyssinians. What was the battle called? 1896. Okay, the Battle of Adawa. There the Europeans actually lost and ran and left. There were many other cases where they also left. And World War I is crucial to understand World War I for Africa. It's crucial to understand because World War I, at the end of World War I, Germany is a losing power. And they also lose the colonial territories in Africa. You know where they were. They were in Tanzania today. That was their colony. That region, more or less, called Tanganyika, was German. Then they were in another place called Togo. Togo by Ghana. That borderland area, that was German. And then, of course, Namibia and German Southwest Africa. And when they left after the First World War, South Africa was given this territory to administer under the League of Nations system called the Mandate Territories. So they had a belief that superior civilizations must help lesser, poorer, uncivilized. This is the language they use. Go look at the documentation that lesser civilized countries and nations must be helped into civilization by more powerful. This was the mandate system. So Britain had it, Britain were given to rule over certain territories, France. And in South Africa, because they saw white South Africa as civilized enough, you run Namibia, which they called Southwest Africa until 1990. And a brutal war in that part of the world, which we won't look at now. Okay, so World War I sees a transfer, but it's also crucial because many blacks are taken to fight in that war. Okay, the blacks are taken to fight. Blacks find themselves in battlefields. South Africans, the South Africans are involved in this war, and they begin to see that, well, you know, white people aren't only beating black people. White people are fighting amongst themselves. That they can be very brutal to themselves, and that not all white people are bad to black people. So they go into European cities and they see that it's possible to have normal relations. It's not, because there are many poor people, working class people, and so on. So this is very important turning point in terms of a consciousness about what is possible and a different style and a different way. So the beginnings of Pan-Africanism, the idea of Africans, of people thinking of themselves as Africans, starts around here, because the Caribbeans in England, the intellectuals are moving, connecting with each other. And around this time, we begin to see the stirrings of this idea. And people are thinking, but no, man, I'm not a Hausa. I'm more, there are other people in Africa also. Because you can imagine that for a long time, with the types of communications in Africa, people must have imagined that all these people living here were all sort of Hausa speaking, or Yoruba, or Igbo, or Wolof, or Xhosa, or something. Suddenly, they come into even within the armies of the British, they see that there are peoples from all over. That not all black people are Xhosa speaking, or Zulu speaking, or Hausa speaking. You see, so there's a real shift in consciousness after this when they meet together. Okay, so the important point, firstly, is to recognize that initially resistance was quote-unquote conservative, in the sense that it was about defensive rather. It was about defending the order, the local order. It was not about creating an equal society or an egalitarian this, or all these modern notions, ideas that we now have for women, to liberate women. It was not about that at all. It was simply to say, we want to defend this space. We want to defend our territory against the Mzungu, against the white man. That's the Mzungu is a Swahili term for the Mzungu is a Swahili term for white man, or the foreign man. You heard of Mzungu?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the foreign person. What do you say?
Mulongo.
Mulongo.
Xhosa. Same as Zulu.
So, and in the case of South Africa, as late as 1906, you still have an armed uprising. But it continues into the 20s in other territories. These kinds of uprisings with arms to protect the space against the colonial state and the colonial encroachment. It continues for a long time.